You know, there are stories we tell about ourselves that become bigger than the truth, bigger than the money, even. They become the foundation of who we are in the eyes of the world. For Daniel Price, that story was simple, but absolutely gold-plated. He bought Bitcoin at $12. $12. Think about that for a minute. That's less than a decent lunch sandwich today. But back then, when most folks thought crypto was something you put on a pizza, Daniel was wading into the deep end. He made sure everyone knew it, too. Daniel was the kind of guy who looked perpetually successful. We're talking tailored suit, custom shoes that whispered across the marble floor, and a watch that probably cost more than my first car. He wasn't just rich, he was early. And in the world of finance, being early is a badge of honor you wear until you die. He carried that story around like a lucky charm, polishing it every chance he got. At finance panels in New York, at private dinners in Palo Alto, and especially at the annual Apex Financial Summit in Miami, the kind of closed-door event where the air conditioning is too cold and the deals are too hot. This year, Daniel was the headliner, the living legend. The moderator, a shark woman named Eleanor, introduced him with theatrical reverence. Please welcome a man who didn't just see the future, he purchased it before it was even listed on the menu. A true pioneer, the $12 man himself, Daniel Price. The applause was a heavy, admiring roar. Daniel strode onto the stage, soaking it up. He loved the sound of that admiration more than the sound of his bank notifications. It was why he kept repeating the story year after year. It wasn't just bragging. It was necessary maintenance for his reputation. He settled into the leather armchair, adjusted the microphone, and launched into the familiar narrative, the slightly dodgy website, the nervous feeling, the small initial investment, the conviction. Everyone told me I was crazy, he'd say, leaning in conspiratorially. My accountant nearly had a coronary, but I held. Through the crashes, through the media panic, I just held. He talked about the early days, the adrenaline of watching the price climb past 1,000, then 10,000. He never mentioned the exact number of coins he held. That was implied to be astronomical, but the audience could do the math. $12 to where they were today? The man was a billionaire, or certainly close enough for government work. The Q&A session began, and the questions were mostly fawning. How did you know? What's your next big bet? Daniel answered them with the smooth confidence of a man who knows he can't fail. Then came the question that changed the temperature in the room. It came from the back, near the coffee station. A young man, maybe mid-20s, wearing a slightly ill-fitting suit. He looked like he'd studied for this conference harder than for his college finals. His name tag read Mark Lewis, Junior Analyst. Mark wasn't asking a visionary question. He was asking a procedural one, the kind of detail that only matters when something goes wrong. Mr. Price, thank you for sharing your journey, Mark said, his voice a little shaky but clear. Given the size of your early holding and thinking about long-term security, could you walk us through your current custody solution? Are we talking institutional cold storage or something more personal? Daniel smiled, a wide, indulgent grin. He loved this kind of question. It allowed him to reinforce the image that he was too savvy for the usual corporate nonsense.
Mark, that's an excellent question, and thank you for asking it. You know, when you buy something at $12, you don't necessarily trust the infrastructure that comes along later. I'm an old-school guy, Daniel said, tapping his chest. I believe in self-custody, total control. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the audience murmur with approval. Self-custody was the ultimate sign of a true crypto purist. My coins, Daniel continued, lowering his voice slightly, are secured on the very first hardware wallet I ever purchased, an absolute dinosaur of a device, tucked away safely. It's been offline for years, a true time capsule. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, and the entire room leaned forward. This was show and tell. He pulled out a small, unassuming USB device. It was dark gray, slightly scuffed, and looked less sophisticated than a thumb drive you'd get for free at a trade show. This little guy, Daniel announced, holding it up like the Holy Grail, holds the keys to the kingdom. He walked over to the side table where a laptop was set up for demonstrations. He plugged the device into the USB port with a flourish. The screen recognized the hardware. A small window popped up, asking for the PIN. Daniel punched in the 6 digits, quick and confident. He gave the audience a sly look, as if to say, "See, this is how it's done." The screen blinked. Then it displayed a message. "PIN incorrect. Please try again." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the room. Technical glitches happen. "Ah, technology," Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. He tried it again, slower this time. He was still smiling, but the smile looked a little tighter around the edges. "PIN incorrect. 2 attempts remaining." The room went quieter. Mark Lewis, the junior analyst, was watching Daniel's hands, not the screen. Daniel tried the 3rd time. He frowned slightly, mouthing the numbers to himself. He pressed enter.
The laptop screen went dark for a moment, then flashed a message that hit the room like a sudden drop in air pressure. Device locked, recovery phrase required, or device wiped. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was the absence of sound, the kind of stillness that happens right before a crash. Daniel pulled the device out quickly, tossing it onto the table as if it had burned him. He straightened his tie and forced a laugh that sounded brittle and high. Well, there you have it, folks. The perils of ultra-security. It's been too long since I accessed that thing. He tried to transition immediately, pointing to the next slide. But fear not, I have the recovery phrase secured elsewhere, of course. Deep cold storage, just not immediately accessible for a little impromptu show. He was trying to wave it off, but the energy of the room had fundamentally changed. The admiration had curdled into professional curiosity, edged with suspicion. Mark Lewis didn't say anything, but his eyes never left Daniel. Daniel, sensing the need to provide a more detailed yet somehow charming explanation, leaned back into the microphone. He decided to deploy the story he'd used privately to explain away the occasional technical hiccup, the one about his daughter. The funny thing about these recovery phrases, Daniel began, adopting a tone of paternal expiration, is that you store them on something totally disconnected from the internet, right? For years, I had the passphrase saved as a text file on an old, ancient Dell laptop. It was just sitting in the guest room closet, never plugged in, never touched. He paused, sighing dramatically. Enter my youngest, 8-year-old Lily, sweetest kid you'll ever meet. She found the laptop one rainy Saturday. She wanted to play an old educational game I had on there. She's a clever girl, Lily is. She figured out the login, but the machine was running so slow. You know how those old ones get.
He shook his head, a fond yet slightly pained look on his face. So, what did Lily do? She decided to help Daddy by making the computer run faster. She found the System Restore button, a full factory reset, wiped everything back to 2012. He spread his hands out. The text file? Gone. Poof. Years of security, undone by a little girl trying to be helpful. He looked out of the audience, expecting the wave of sympathetic laughter. It didn't come. There were a few polite coughs, but mostly just people staring. It's handled, though, Daniel added quickly. Maybe too quickly. It's just a procedural issue. I have backup methods, obviously. It's just not quick. We're working on it. We're working on it. That phrase hung in the air, heavy and unconvincing. The mood had shifted from a celebration of success to a cold examination of process failure. No one wanted to be the one to ask the obvious follow-up. What exactly is your backup method if the primary phrase is gone and the device is locked? Mark Lewis was still watching. He wasn't aggressive, just intensely focused, like a hawk spotting a trimmer in the grass. It was then that Rachel, an accountant from a major San Francisco firm sitting near the front, noticed something else. Rachel was sharp. She dealt in verification and audit trails, not anecdotes. Daniel was pretending to engage with another question, something vapid about the future of DeFi, but his left hand kept dipping into his pocket. He was refreshing his phone screen over and over. Rachel suddenly leaned forward, trying to catch a glimpse of the screen. Daniel was using a blockchain explorer app, the kind that shows the history of transactions on a specific wallet address. He was refreshing the address linked to his legendary $12 purchase.
Rachel didn't need to see the address itself to know what he was looking for. He was checking for movement, any movement, a withdrawal, a transfer, a sign that the coins were still accessible, still there. And every time he refreshed the screen, Daniel's jaw tightened just a fraction more. Because the screen showed exactly what it had shown for years: zero activity. The coins were sitting in a verifiable, publicly visible address, but they hadn't moved. They were frozen in time. The question that had been lurking in the shadows finally broke the surface. It wasn't Mark who asked it, but a man named David, a venture capitalist notorious for his bluntness. "Daniel," David said, his voice slow and heavy, "with respect, your explanation about the recovery phrase is charming. But for the sake of transparency, and given the scale of the assets we're discussing, can you provide any verifiable proof that the coins are truly recoverable? Perhaps an email chain with your custody provider, or documentation of the ongoing recovery efforts you mentioned?" This was the moment the floor dropped out. This wasn't a friendly panel anymore. It was an audit. Daniel's face flushed a deep, uncomfortable red. He swallowed hard. He couldn't refuse. The entire mythology of Daniel Price was built on verification. If he refused, the narrative would collapse instantly. "Of course," Daniel managed, his voice sounding dry. "I'm happy to share the steps we've taken. This is a common issue with legacy wallets, and it illustrates the importance of robust disaster recovery planning." He signaled to the technician to put his email on the main projector screen. As the large screen lit up, displaying Daniel's inbox, a collective gasp went through the audience. It wasn't a hacker attack or a major technical failure they saw. It was worse. It was administrative despair.
The screen showed a long, scrolling list of emails, all addressed to the support teams of various high-end crypto recovery services and specialized cryptographic firms. Subject lines stood out in stark relief. Urgent, Legacy Wallet Access Request, Case 401-2019. Follow-up, Price Holdings, Private Key Reconstruction Feasibility. Query, Hardware Wallet Firmware Bypass, no seed phrase. Automated reply, Price Holdings Recovery Request, status, unlikely. The dates spanned years. The last automated reply was just 3 weeks old. Status, unlikely. Daniel quickly tried to scroll down, trying to find a more positive thread, perhaps a response from an optimistic consultant, but he scrolled too far. The screen briefly displayed another email chain, one not related to crypto recovery at all. It was correspondence with a major commercial bank regarding a multi-million-dollar business loan application. The bank officer's email included a detailed breakdown of Daniel's declared assets. The line item that drew all eyes was undeniable. Crypto assets, BTC. Value, XXXXXXX.0. Accessibility status, inaccessible. Collateral status, unacceptable due to custody risk. Daniel slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing loudly in the silent hall. He didn't need to say anything else. The room had the answer. The legend of the 12-man was true. He had bought the Bitcoin, but the legend of the holder was a lie. He didn't hold it. He had watched it grow, inaccessible, for years. His treasure was real, but it was buried deep beneath a layer of forgotten digits and a child's helpful click of a button. The panel was over, though Eleanor hadn't formally closed it. The conversations that had been paused didn't resume. People didn't look at Daniel. They looked at the floor, or their phones, or the ceiling. They were calculating the difference between a man who had billions and a man who couldn't touch billions.
As Daniel stepped off the stage, the heavy silence followed him. He tried to exchange a few pleasantries, but the usual handshakes were replaced by stiff nods. Mark Lewis, the junior analyst, finally spoke, but not to Daniel. He turned to Rachel, the accountant, and whispered, "He's been refreshing that address for 4 years, hasn't he?" Rachel simply nodded, her expression grim. "He's been watching his own fortune sail away, one price hike at a time." Later that afternoon, the badges for the next speaker session were handed out. No one introduced Daniel Price as a crypto legend or a pioneer or even a successful holder. He was just listed on the program as a speaker, and when the session started, the moderator simply noted that the previous panelist had run out of time. Daniel Price walked out of the Apex Financial Summit in Miami, the salt air suddenly feeling cold on his skin. Want stories like this every week? Subscribe to our channel and discover how a crypto empire maybe is not as you think and nobody talks about. He still had the tailored suit, the expensive watch, and the story of buying Bitcoin at $12. But the admiration was gone. He was no longer a legend of foresight. He was a cautionary tale of a procedural error. He drove his rented sedan back toward the city, the small, scuffed hardware wallet sitting in the cup holder next to his phone. He knew what he had to do next. The polite recovery requests and the appeals to logic were finished. It was time to try something drastic, something that risked not just his money, but everything he had left, his family, his reputation, and his sanity. Because the cost of doing nothing, of just watching that blockchain explore, was becoming too high to bear. He had to get those coins back, by any means necessary.
He was going to find the man who could crack the impossible. And that search would take him far away from the polished floors of finance summits and deep into the strange, unregulated edges of the digital world. Daniel drove north from Miami, but he might as well have been driving away from his own life. The air conditioning in the rental car was blasting, but he couldn't shake the chill he'd felt standing on that stage. It wasn't just the loss of the money, it was the loss of the story. The admiration was the oxygen he breathed, and the audience had just watched him gasp his last breath of it. When he finally got back to his house in Greenwich, Connecticut, the tailored suits went into the closet and the polished facade cracked wide open. Daniel Price, the $12 man, became Daniel Price, the man who lived in the den, surrounded by 3 monitors, drinking bad coffee at 3 a.m. He couldn't go back to the professional recovery firms. He knew what they would say. He had seen the status unlikely emails for 4 years. Those companies were regulated, insured, and deeply risk-averse. They wouldn't touch a high-stakes, low-probability brute force attack on a legacy wallet. If they failed, they would be sued into oblivion. No, this required someone who operated outside the lines, someone who didn't care about insurance or lawsuits, someone who only cared about the impossible profit. Daniel started his search where all desperate people look for secrets, the dark, dusty corners of the internet. He wasn't looking at Bloomberg terminals anymore. He was looking at forums that required multiple layers of verification just to read the comments. He felt like a tourist in a dangerous foreign country. He had to learn a new language of aliases, encrypted chats, and throwaway VPNs. Daniel, who had made his fortune on transparency and confidence, was now seeking anonymity and shadow contacts. He spent 2 weeks wading through noise, scams, ridiculous offers, and outright digital snake oil salesmen. He needed a legend, not a hacker trying to steal his credit card number. And then he found the whisper. It wasn't an ad or a contact form. It was a single cryptic reference buried deep in a technical discussion about obsolete wallet firmware. Someone mentioned a specialist known only as the librarian. The legend went that the librarian didn't steal coins, he found them. He didn't care about small scores. He specialized in digital archaeology, lost fortunes, inaccessible trusts, and wallets locked by time or death. He was rumored to have recovered hundreds of millions, and his fee was always the same, a non-negotiable percentage of the recovered total, often starting at 20% and sometimes climbing higher if the hardware was particularly stubborn. Getting to the librarian was a mission in itself. It involved a series of encrypted messages, burner phones, and identity checks that made the TSA look like a kindergarten field trip. Daniel, who usually had assistants manage his travel and communication, had to navigate this labyrinth alone. The tension was exhausting, draining the last vestiges of his professional calm. Finally, after a week of back and forth, he received a single plain text message. Meeting. Tomorrow. 2 p.m. Port Jervis Diner. NJ. Booth 7. Ask for Leo. Port Jervis, New Jersey was 1,000,000 miles away from the marble floors of Miami. It was a place where people worried about paying the gas bill, not the price of Bitcoin. Daniel showed up exactly at 1:55 p.m., dressed in a discreet but still expensive charcoal blazer. He felt ridiculous, a billionaire waiting for a clandestine meeting in a vinyl booth smelling faintly of fried onions and stale coffee. At 2:01 p.m., a man slid into the booth across him. This wasn't the librarian. This was Leo.
Leo was the physical opposite of Daniel. He was maybe 30, with a neck tattoo that disappeared into his color, and eyes that looked perpetually bored. He wore a faded hoodie and chewed gum with loud, rhythmic snaps. If Daniel was the polished result of American ambition, Leo was the cynical byproduct of digital disregard. "Your price," Leo stated, not asking. "I am. You're working with the librarian?" Daniel tried to sound authoritative, but his voice was a little shaky. Leo rolled his eyes, which seemed to be his standard reaction to everything. "Nobody works with the librarian. I'm the filter. I handle the stupid questions and the paperwork." He pulled a thin, worn folder from his hoodie pocket and slapped it onto the table. "Let's get this straight, Price. Your story is boring. Rich guy bought early, lost the keys because his kid is too smart for her own good. Happens 10 times a month. The only thing interesting about your story is the number of coins. It's big enough to bother with." Daniel stiffened. "I need to know the process. How do you intend to access the wallet?" Leo leaned back, folding his arms. "You sent the specs on the device. It's old, which is both good and bad. Good, the encryption isn't as complex as the new stuff. Bad, one wrong command and that thing fries itself. The failsafe is absolute. 3 more failed inputs and the device wipes the memory storage. Total loss. No recovery, ever." Daniel felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. "I know the risk." "No, you don't," Leo countered, his voice suddenly sharp. "You know the financial risk. You don't know the technical risk. We are talking about a physical, highly complex brute force attack on a machine built to withstand it. We have to essentially build a parallel processing system just to guess the PIN and the passphrase combinations based on the statistical probability of your own habits." "My habits?"
"Yeah. Your birthday, your wedding anniversary, your first dog's name, your favorite team's jersey number. You think you used a random string of 12 words. You used words that felt safe. We'll find them. But it takes time, specialized hardware, and power. Lots of power."
Leo slid a document across the table. It was a contract, written in dense, intimidating legal jargon, but the key points were highlighted in red marker. "The fee is 25% of the recovered funds, non-negotiable. If we succeed, we take our cut automatically, and the rest is transferred to your new, secure wallet. If we fail, or if the device wipes itself in the process, you owe us nothing further, except the initial retainer for the hardware setup and security." Daniel looked at the retainer amount. It was $3 million, upfront, cash or clean crypto only. $3 million just to start, Daniel frowned. That's substantial. "It's the cost of renting a data center in Iceland for 3 months and paying the best brains in the world to stare at code. We don't work cheap, Price. We work miracles, and we don't offer payment plans." Daniel picked up his pen but hesitated before signing. "I need to speak to the librarian. I need assurance that this is feasible." Leo actually cracked a smile, a thin, humorless smirk. "You just did. I am the only assurance you get. You sign, you pay, you hand over the device, and you go home and wait. If you try to find us, track us, or talk to anyone about this, the process stops and we erase everything, including your device. Got it?" The silence stretched,
punctuated only by the sizzle of the diner grill. Daniel looked at the hardware wallet, still tucked safely in his jacket pocket. This was the point of no return. He was betting $3 million and the total, final fate of his multi-billion-dollar fortune on a handshake with a tattooed kid in a greasy diner.
He signed the documents. He arranged for the payment to be transferred in a mix of stablecoins by the end of the day. The last step was the hardest. Daniel carefully removed the small, scuffed USB device from his pocket and placed it on the table. It looked utterly insignificant, yet it held the weight of his entire professional identity. Leo picked it up without ceremony, dropping it into a small, lead-lined pouch. "We'll be in touch. Don't call us. Don't worry. Just wait." And just like that, Leo was gone, leaving Daniel alone in booth 7 with the smell of old coffee and a seismic hole in his bank account. The next few weeks were a purgatory of forced calm. Daniel had to explain the sudden $3 million withdrawal to his financial team, who were already jittery after the Miami disaster. He told his CFO, Mark's older brother who managed Price Holdings, that the money was an emergency down payment for a hostile takeover of a small, privately held tech company in Europe. The deal was so sensitive that it required absolute off-the-books financing. The explanation was shaky, but Daniel had enough residual authority that people mostly nodded and looked away. The biggest challenge was maintaining the lie at home. His wife, Sarah, was accustomed to Daniel's long hours, but this was different. He was tense, jumpy, and obsessed with his phone, checking the Blockchain Explorer address multiple times an hour, watching the frozen balance. "Daniel, you're home, but you're not here," Sarah said one evening, finding him staring blankly at the fireplace, phone in hand. They were in their beautiful, large living room, but it felt cold and empty. "It's this deal, honey," Daniel lied, rubbing his temples. "It's massive. If it goes through, it changes everything. I can't talk about the details. NDAs are vicious." Sarah looked unconvinced. She knew the difference between professional stress and existential dread.
It's not just the deal, Daniel. It's been different since Miami. People were looking at you strangely. Daniel forced a smile. "Just market volatility, darling. They're jealous. They want my early success, but they don't want the technical headaches that come with being a pioneer." He avoided talking about Lily. The guilt over blaming his daughter for the loss, even though it was technically true, was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Lily, now 8.5, was oblivious to the financial catastrophe she had inadvertently caused. She was just a happy kid, drawing pictures and playing games. Daniel found himself watching her sometimes, trying to calculate the true cost of her helpfulness. He had to protect her. If the recovery failed, he knew the media and the people who had invested in his reputation would eventually find out the truth about the missing coins. He couldn't let them turn Lily into the scapegoat. The silence from the librarian's camp was deafening. Days turned into weeks. Daniel started seeing shadows everywhere. Was Leo a scammer? Had he just handed over his entire fortune's key to a criminal? He couldn't sleep. He'd pace the house, sometimes going down to Lily's old Dell laptop, which was now collecting dust in the closet, and stare at the screen, running imaginary recovery scenarios. What password would I have used? He remembered the day he set it up. It was late, he was tired, and he just wanted to get the job done. He had used a combination of words, not random, but meaningful. He tried to think back to 2012 Daniel. What was important to him then? He finally broke down and sent a single, desperate, non-compliant email to the encrypted address Leo had given him. "Any status update." The reply came back instantly, cold and automated. "Silence is progress. Patience is required. Further communication will result in termination of service."
Daniel deleted the email and smashed the burner phone against the wall. He was powerless. He, Daniel Price, the master of his own destiny, was now sitting on the sidelines, waiting for a ghost and a tattooed kid to play Russian roulette with his life savings. The waiting was the worst. It was like living through a slow-motion car crash. Then, 6 weeks after the meeting in Port Jervis, The encrypted phone Daniel was now using, the one he kept hidden in his safe, buzzed. It wasn't a text message. It was a video call request from an unknown number. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. He answered instantly. The screen showed a dimly lit room filled with racks of humming computer equipment. The air looked thick and cold. In the center of the frame was a man Daniel had never seen before. He was older, maybe late 50s, with kind, tired eyes and a meticulous white beard. He wore simple glasses perched on his nose, and he looked less like a master cryptographer and more like a retired college professor. "Mr. Price," the man said, his voice calm and low, with a faint European accent, "I am the librarian." Daniel gripped the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. "What is the status? Did you find it?" The librarian smiled faintly. "We found the pin, Mr. Price. That was the easy part. You used your wife's initials and the last 2 digits of your first corporate bond issue. Very romantic." Daniel felt a jolt of shock and recognition. Of course, it was a habit, a pattern. "But the pin is only half the battle," the librarian continued. "We have 3 attempts left on the device before it wipes. We need the passphrase, the 12 words. We have been running billions of combinations based on known dictionary attacks, personal references, and common user errors, but we haven't found the exact sequence yet." Daniel felt the hope drain out of him. "So you need more time?"
Time is not the issue, Mr. Price. Resources are, and probability. I called you because we have reached a fork in the road, and I need information that only you can provide. The librarian leaned closer to the camera, his expression serious. "We have narrowed the possible word list considerably. We believe the words are related to a specific, emotionally significant event in your life between 2010 and 2012, something you would have considered safe or unforgettable." Daniel racked his brain. The birth of Lily? No, that was 2015. The purchase of the house? Too corporate. "I don't know," Daniel whispered, defeated. "I was just trying to secure the file." "Think, Mr. Price. We have identified a pattern in the words you used for other accounts during that period. They are often linked to a location, a specific physical place that represented security or freedom to you." A location. 2012. Daniel closed his eyes, forcing himself out of the present and back into the past. 2012. He was still grinding, still trying to prove himself, even with the Bitcoin purchase. He was stressed, feeling trapped in the finance world, dreaming of an escape. Then it hit him. Not a memory of security, but a memory of escape. "The cabin," Daniel said, his eyes snapping open. "The family used to rent a cabin up in the Adirondacks, near Lake Placid. Every summer. It was the only place I ever truly relaxed. We went in July 2012. I was working remotely, but I felt free." The librarian nodded slowly, eyes twinkling with professional satisfaction. "Excellent. Now, Mr. Price, I need you to tell me the specific, unique names associated with that place. The local landmarks, the names of the roads, the name of the rental agency, the kind of local things that wouldn't show up in a standard dictionary attack."
Daniel started listing them off. The street name, Black Bear Trail, the name of the lake, Mirror Lake, the name of the rental company, Adirondack Dreams, and the local pub what he always drank, the Lonesome Pine. The librarian typed furiously on a keyboard off screen. "This is good. Very good. We are adding these to the potential word list. We will run a final, highly aggressive sequence starting tonight. This is where the risk increases exponentially. The system has to perform a massive number of checks in a very short window, or the wallet will detect the intrusion and wipe itself." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "We are talking about a few hours, Mr. Price. After that, either you are a free man, or you are a man who just lost everything, irrecoverably." "What are the chances?" Daniel asked, the air catching in his throat. The librarian shrugged, the college professor facade back in place. "Statistically, maybe 50-50. But we have all the data we are going to get. Now, you must wait, and pray, if you are a praying man."
The call disconnected, leaving Daniel staring at the static image of the dark, cold data center. He couldn't go to sleep. He couldn't pace. He felt too wired, too close to the edge. He decided to do the only thing he could think of to distract himself. He would leave the house. He needed to be physically removed from the scene of the crime, the place where the news, good or bad, would arrive. He told Sarah he had an urgent, unexpected trip to take. The deal is finalizing. I have to fly out tonight. Won't be back until tomorrow afternoon. He didn't pack a suitcase. He just grabbed his car keys and started driving west, aimlessly, putting miles between himself and the ticking clock. He drove for hours, eventually finding himself on the outskirts of Scranton, Pennsylvania at 4 a.m. He pulled into a desolate rest stop, the kind of place where the fluorescent lights hum and the coffee is perpetually burnt.
He sat in the dark car, the only sounds the distant rumble of trucks on the interstate and the frantic beating of his own heart. He pulled out his phone, opened the blockchain explorer, and refreshed the address one last time. 0 activity. Frozen. He put the phone down on the passenger seat and stared out the window into the pre-dawn gloom. He wasn't thinking about the money anymore. He was thinking about the story. If he failed, he wasn't just broke. He was a laughingstock. His reputation, which he had spent 20 years building, would be used as a punchline forever. And then there was Lily. He had blamed her, but the truth was, he had been careless. He had relied on a single point of failure, an old, dusty laptop, because he was too arrogant to believe he could ever lose control. It wasn't Lily's fault. It was his hubris. He had never truly confronted the possibility of total loss. He had always believed in his own exceptionalism. But now, sitting in a dark parking lot in Scranton, Daniel Price realized he was just a regular man who had made a catastrophic mistake, and his entire future was resting on the highly speculative efforts of a ghost in an Icelandic data center. He looked at the dashboard clock. It was 4:45 a.m. The librarian had said a few hours. The attack was running now. The machine was guessing, burning through millions of possibilities per second, racing against the hardware's internal timer. Daniel closed his eyes, visualizing the 12 words. Black. Bear. Trail. Mirror. Lake. Lonesome. Pine. Suddenly, his phone vibrated. Not the burner phone, but his regular personal phone. Sarah was calling him. He answered, his voice tight. Sarah, what is it? Is everything okay? Sarah's voice was strained, high-pitched with fear. Daniel, you need to come home. Now. Something happened. What? What happened? Is it Lily? He demanded, adrenaline flooding his system.
No, she's fine. But the house is a mess. The police are here. They said someone broke in. They said they were looking for something specific. Break in? In Greenwich? Daniel's mind raced. They didn't steal the watch, the jewelry, or the cash Sarah kept hidden. They were looking for something specific. The hardware wallet was gone, but the legend of the hardware wallet was still very much alive. Someone knew about the lost coins. Someone knew he was trying to recover them. Sarah, listen to me, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Stay calm. Tell the police you don't know anything. I'm coming back immediately. Do not touch anything. He slammed the phone down and threw the car into reverse, the tires squealing on the wet asphalt. He was no longer just waiting for a miracle. He was in a race against time, and now against actual physical threats. His desperate move to recover the crypto had alerted predators. The world of shadows he had entered to save his fortune was now reaching out to grab him, and it was starting with his family. He drove east toward Connecticut, the sun just beginning to streak the sky, completely unaware that at that very moment, 300 miles away in a cold data center, the librarian had just paused the brute force attack. The librarian had found 2 words that matched the Adirondack theme, mirror and pine. He had run a combination that used those words in conjunction with a familiar pattern from Daniel's earlier pins. and the machine was now awaiting the final, terrifying input. The librarian had to risk the third attempt. He had to decide if he had the right key, or if he would wipe the fortune forever. The librarian looked down at the console, the faint blue light reflecting in his glasses. He had found the 2 keywords, mirror and pine, but he needed 10 more, and he had 1 attempt left before the failsafe tripped, wiping the data forever.
He was a man who dealt in probability, and the probability of hitting all 12 words in one shot, even with the narrowed list, was terrifyingly low. But he had extracted every possible piece of personal data from Daniel Price. He knew Daniel's patterns, his emotional anchors, and the way his mind sought comfort in routine. He stared at the screen, running the final algorithms. The words had to be common, mixed with the unique location names. Not just Lonesome Pine, but perhaps a feeling associated with it. Freedom, lake, cabin, 7, quiet, July. The librarian typed the final sequence into the input field. He didn't hesitate. He had done all the math. This was the only chance. He pressed enter. The room, usually filled with the loud hum of cooling fans, seemed to hold its breath. The screen flickered for a long, agonizing moment. Daniel's entire fortune and the librarian's massive fee was suspended in that digital void. Then, the screen changed. It didn't display an error. It displayed the wallet dashboard. Status: unlocked. Balance: XXX dollars. $00. A quiet, almost imperceptible sigh escaped the librarian's lips. He wasn't ecstatic. He was satisfied. He had beat the machine. He immediately called Leo. It's done. Initiate the transfer protocols. Secure the fee first, then send the remainder to the new wallet address provided by Price. Execute immediately. We don't hold this access a second longer than necessary. While Daniel Price was speeding frantically across state lines, heading back to the mess in Greenwich, his digital life was being fundamentally restructured. The massive transfer took only minutes. The inaccessible, frozen fortune was suddenly liquid, moving across the blockchain faster than Daniel's borrowed sedan. Leo sent Daniel a single non-encrypted text message to his regular phone. Done. Check new address. Daniel saw the notification pop up on the dash console as he barreled through an early morning toll booth. Done. It was too simple, too casual for the potentially multi-billion-dollar news it contained. He pulled over immediately, tires crunching onto the shoulder of the highway. His hands were shaking too hard to type, but he managed to open the crypto exchange app where he had established the new, secure wallet address. He refreshed the screen. The balance was there, a dizzying, astronomical number, minus exactly 25%. The librarian's cut. The coins were safe. They were his. Did this story surprise you? Share it with someone who needs to hear this. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe now. The immediate, overwhelming relief was so powerful, it nearly brought him to his knees. He gripped the steering wheel, breathing heavily, tears blurring his vision. He hadn't just recovered the money. He had recovered his future, his sanity, and the narrative of his life. But the relief was instantly tempered by the memory of Sarah's frantic call, the break-in. He hit the gas, the exhilaration of success fueling his need to get home and protect his family. When Daniel finally pulled up to his sprawling Greenwich estate, the sun was fully up, and the scene was exactly as Sarah had described, chaotic. 2 police cruisers were parked on the circular drive, their lights silently flashing. Sarah was sitting on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket, talking to a uniformed officer. Daniel jumped out of the car and rushed to his wife. "Sarah, are you okay? Where's Lily?" "We're fine, Daniel. They didn't touch us. Lily is still asleep. I told her it was just a burst pipe." Sarah's eyes were red, but she was composed. "They came through the back door. They weren't noisy.
They were professional.
A detective, a serious man named Miller, approached Daniel. "Mr. Price, we've secured the scene. It was a targeted search. They bypassed all the valuable items, jewelry, silver, cash, and went straight for your home office and the guest room closet." Daniel felt a chill. The guest room closet. That's where the old Dell laptop had been stored. "Did they take anything from the closet?" Daniel asked, trying to sound casual. "Just an old laptop, sir. A large gray Dell machine from years ago, completely obsolete. We're dusting for prints now, but they were wearing gloves. We suspect they were looking for sensitive data, perhaps corporate secrets." Daniel knew exactly what they were looking for, the source file of the original recovery phrase. They must have believed he was lying about the factory reset, or that the phrase could be physically reconstructed from the hard drive fragments. "I have no idea why they would want that old relic," Daniel lied smoothly, running a hand through his hair. "It's just old files, probably some disgruntled former employee trying to stir up trouble." He was already formulating his next move. He had to make sure the world knew the wallet was unlocked before the news of the break-in could be connected to the missing crypto. He needed to control the story, instantly. He thanked the officers, promising full cooperation, and ushered Sarah inside. As soon as they were alone, Daniel pulled Sarah into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I need to tell you the truth about everything. About the money, about Miami, and about Lily." He sat her down, and for the first time in years, he dropped the facade completely. He told her about the locked wallet, the years of lying, the humiliating panel, and the desperate clandestine deal with the librarian. Sarah listened, her face moving from shock to anger, then finally to understanding.
"All those years, Daniel," she whispered, her voice laced with pain. "All those years, you were watching your money float away, and you never told me. We could have lost everything." "I know," Daniel admitted, the shame heavy on his shoulders. "I was too proud, too afraid of losing the story. But it's back, Sarah. It's recovered. The librarian found the key. He showed her the new balance on the secure app. It's real, Sarah. We're safe. We're more than safe." Sarah didn't look at the number. She looked at him. "The money is fine, Daniel. But what about the story you told about Lily?" That was the hardest part. Daniel walked down the hall to Lily's room. She was just waking up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. He sat on the edge of her bed. "Hey, sweetie, did you hear the ruckus this morning?" "Just some silly plumbing issues." Lily nodded sleepily. "Lily, I need to tell you something important," Daniel began, his voice thick. "Do you remember a long time ago when you were much smaller and you made Daddy's old computer run faster?" Lily smiled. "Yeah, I was helping." "You were helping, honey. You were being so smart and so helpful. And when you did that, you accidentally made a file disappear that Daddy needed." Lily's smile faded. "I'm sorry, Daddy." "No, honey," Daniel said, pulling her close. "I am sorry. I should have told you how important that file was, and I should have had a better backup. It was completely my fault, and I want you to know that I told people that you made a mistake, and that wasn't fair of me. You didn't make a mistake. Daddy was careless." He held her tightly, finally releasing the burden of guilt he had carried for years. Lily didn't understand the scope of the problem, but she understood the apology. "It's okay, Daddy," she said simply, hugging him back. "I forgive you." The immediate crisis was over, but Daniel knew he couldn't go back to the way things were. The world had seen the crack in his golden armor.
He had the money, but he had lost the admiration.
2 days later, Daniel Price made an announcement, but not on a finance panel. He issued a short, controlled press release through his holding company. It was highly technical, stating that due to a multi-year security audit and migration process required for all legacy digital assets, Price Holdings had successfully moved its core crypto assets to a new state-of-the-art institutional cold storage facility. He included a link to the new publicly verifiable blockchain address, showing the massive active balance. The press release was designed to instantly overwrite the narrative of the Miami disaster. It didn't mention Lily, the factory reset, or the librarian. It simply confirmed the money was safe and accessible. The reaction in the finance world was immediate and complex. Mark Lewis, the junior analyst who had started the whole mess, was watching the news ticker. He looked stunned. He did it.
He actually recovered it. Rachel, the accountant, emailed her firm. Price is verified. Asset status, liquid. The admiration didn't return immediately. The narrative shifted from legendary holder to incredibly lucky dodger. He was still rich, but he was no longer infallible. He was a man who had flown too close to the sun and nearly crashed. Daniel Price never spoke on a finance panel again. He realized the price of that constant public admiration was the necessity of the lie. He had spent years repeating the story of the $12 purchase, not for the value of the money, but for the thrill of the applause. Now that the truth of his near catastrophe was known, even if obliquely, the applause felt hollow. He retired from the public eye almost completely, stepping down from the day-to-day operations of Price Holdings, leaving the CFO, Mark Lewis's older brother, in charge.
Daniel kept his promise to the librarian, never mentioning his name or the process. He never contacted Leo again. The world of shadows receded, leaving Daniel in the light. But the memory of the Port Jervis diner and the cold data center was a permanent reminder of the edge he had walked. He focused on what the money was actually for: freedom. Freedom from the spotlight. Freedom to be present. He spent more time with Sarah and Lily. They even went back to the Adirondacks cabin that summer, near Mirror Lake, where the key to his fortune had been hidden in plain sight. One afternoon, sitting by the water, Lily was drawing in a sketchbook. Daniel watched her, relaxed and genuinely happy for the first time in years. He still checked the Blockchain Explorer sometimes, but now it was just a technical confirmation, not an act of desperate longing. The balance was still massive, still growing. He had bought Bitcoin at $12. That was the truth. But the real story wasn't the purchase. It was the recovery. It wasn't the foresight. It was the near disaster and the humbling realization that all the money in the world couldn't buy back a password or replace a relationship built on trust. Daniel Price had finally learned the most important lesson of all. A fortune isn't truly yours until you accept the possibility of losing it. And the greatest treasure wasn't the number on the screen, but the quiet life he was finally living, far away from the applause. He was no longer the $12 man. He was simply Daniel Price, and that, finally, was enough.